Hello, everyone. Welcome to our channel's first video. Today, we're talking about whether or not your game mechanics are helping to tell the story, and does it even matter? Before we get started, who the hell are we? My name is Michael Willer. I've been a game designer working on Space Thieves for about 8 years now with my co-game designer.
Hello. Yes, I'm Matt Smith. I came on board Space Thieves a couple years after Michael, but I have been playing games forever and am really just a fan of the space.
I mean, ultimately, that's the goal. Is I just want to have the game to be able to play with my friends. And I mean, a big element of role-playing games is the storytelling. It's the, like, how do you use the game as a structure to tell stories and to entertain each other? I think there's a fascinating sort of, design challenge, which is how do you use the game mechanics to help inspire story moments? And is that even something you can try and design for, or is that just something that has to come up organically, as you're playing the game? I mean, I think it can be both, but I do like the idea of, like, knowing, for instance, what genre of game you're playing in, right? So, like, high fantasy, sort of medieval fantasy being like the classic. Usually people start with D&D 5th edition and
Sure.
kind of get into the hobby that way. That was my experience. I think that was also your experience too.
Yes. Yeah. The first time sort of formal role-playing was definitely through D&D.
But we also have filmmaking backgrounds. So I'm a writer, director, producer. Matt, you're also a writer.
And I'm also a writer, yes.
To us, narrative is kind of a huge deal. Like, that really does make or break a role-playing game experience. And, we've been working on Space Thieves, as I mentioned, for about 8 years now. And one of the things that you have to kind of look at as you're going, because it's been through so many iterations, is, last year I had this check-in moment of, like, what is the genre of this game? And what do we want it to feel like as people play it? If we're looking at, like, okay, we're going to be maybe more science fantasy as opposed to science fiction. And what are the tropes of fantasy over, like, hard sci-fi? And then some of the tropes of, like, oh, we want to kind of have that, like, scrappy underdog vibe to it. Kind of like, rebels against the empire. Not that you have to keep that narrative structure, but that's how characters, like player characters, should kind of feel.
Sure, as opposed to something a little more sort of slick and cyberpunky, or something like really grimdark and baroque. That fine balance of kind of high adventure in space.
And that's the thing of, like, high adventure, it's a tough balance to strike, because you want the tension to come from the stakes, from having big stakes. And oftentimes, at least as far as the game design and the actual rules of the game, usually you're looking at those stakes being like the risk of your character dying, and that they're going to do dangerous things to overcome very big, important story obstacles. That on a mechanical level, character death is oftentimes like the biggest consequence you can face. And so, do you want to have a game that has very common character death? Is that going to be a part of the gaming experience at your table where your characters will die? Or do you want it just to be, a risk that exists, but that the game is not necessarily designed to cause to happen constantly, that it should feel risky without actually making, player character death a constant overlooming threat?
Yeah. I mean, I certainly know as a player, like, I get attached to my characters. I don't really want to roll a new one over the course of a campaign. But by the same token, I don't want to feel like I'm just, strolling through, experiencing a story like museum exhibits. Like, I want to feel like there's some weight to it.
So let's get into it a little more specifically. When we talk about, like, stakes, in the case of game design, we've been this is a very relevant topic for us right now, because we've been working on a structure that we wanted to include in the scene by scene, encounters. Like, you're going through an adventure, and is there something that we can have kind of unobtrusive, but still over top of the gameplay, that gives you a sense of rising tension, that kind of mimics the narrative escalation of the more you go through your adventure and then maybe screw something up or you fail a roll, that you can track those and show an escalation in risk or danger or some kind of, tension. But it's a tough thing, because as we've been playtesting this, if you codify the idea that a narrative complication or narrative like escalation is tied to a very specific mechanic, then you get players and GMs sort of assuming that, oh, that is the only way the narrative can get escalated, that it can, and that if you have a game mechanic for it and a structure for it, that they're waiting for that to happen before any kind of narrative escalation occurs. And that doesn't feel right. Like, it doesn't quite do it for me.
Yeah. I think there is a point where if you build the storytelling too much into the mechanics, then you are stifling, the players and GMs that just want to tell a story the way they want to tell it.
Yeah.
You need to find some way to kind of allow for both.
Yeah. I think in allowing for both, you're sort of allowing for improvisation, which is where you get into like that concept of rules heavy, where every single action that could ever be taken has a codified rule for it, versus rules light, where largely things are going to be improvisational and verbalized between players and GM. And you and I tend to land kind of in the middle somewhere. Like we want to put narrative, very, very in the forefront, but we like the game of it too. Like, we like having the rules and the structure.
Yeah.
And so if those rules can be a structure for generating moments of improv, then I think you start to get something a little bit more in the vein of allowing the GMs and the players to tell the stories they want to tell, while still kind of pushing in the direction of, we're going to keep escalating the tension in this scene because, a certain number of story beats have happened. Like, you tried to do a thing, it was risky, you failed, and now we're going to sort of measure that in the game and show how, the tension's rising. And, the idea we have right now, which I think it could be interesting to talk about, because I literally just sent this to you last night.
Yes.
So we haven't really discussed it that much. But it was kind of shifting the idea that you're tracking moments of risk, which kind of gave the wrong impression that, oh, if we classify a role as risky and then it can turn into certain things, that sort of implicitly means that any roles that aren't classified that way are narratively not risky or have no stakes. And so that felt wrong. That felt like, okay, well, we don't want to identify roles that way. So maybe we identify them as something like daunting, where like there's a kind of generalized pressure around it that's making your character potentially second guess themselves, or making them feel like they have to rise up and kind of overcome this particular challenge, whatever it is narratively.
Yeah.
And so that feels a little bit better. So I wonder, like, have you ever hit a game mechanic in any role-playing game that you've played where the name for the mechanic felt dissonant with the play experience that you got as a player? Meaning the experience that you had as a player, sort of imagining your character, getting immersed in the narrative of what's happening, was not lining up with what the name of the mechanic led you to believe it would be like.
There are some systems that maybe the terminology is a little esoteric, and it feels a little gamey. I've dabbled in Fate, the Fate system, a little bit, and there you're placing lots of like aspects out into the world. And I have friends who will rant against this more than I will, but it did feel a little bit kind of opaque in the way that you're just kind of throwing down these weird sort of post-it notes into the world, like, oh, here's a thing that exists now because I declared it did. It works for a certain kind of very free-form storytelling, but I found myself longing for something a bit more concrete.
I'm in a similar camp. So I haven't played Fate, but I have played Monster of the Week. A friend of mine ran a Monster of the Week campaign for a while. There's a wibbly-wobbliness to the sort of narrative-first way of, for instance, navigating anything occurring in moments of intensity or danger, where you kind of want to have a sense of how things are occurring in a flow. Like, it would be a turn order in, any tactical type of game, where if that doesn't exist, you sort of have this like, well, people just sort of say they do stuff. It's not frustrating per se, but it was like dissatisfying as a player, because it felt like I couldn't think much further ahead than what was happening right in that moment, because without structure, because you get less of an ability to kind of like read into the future and try and create plans that are structured around game mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, you're creating plans that are structured around narrative, that's the point. What we were doing was sort of stumbling through, and it felt kind of unearned in a way.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, you've talked about this in games that I've run, where if there's an encounter, you want to know that there's like an answer for it, that there's like a solution, some way to like, what do we do to solve this problem? There's like a parody there of like, what mechanics can I utilize to engage with this scene and feel like I played the game well? And I know that's a divisive stance. A lot of people really don't want their gameplay to work that way, and I think there's games for that. But I like landing somewhere in the middle where you have freedom to improvise, but you also have a structure that inspires you to do so.
I definitely agree. And I think you could draw parallels to, I think, what we've both experienced in the filmmaking world, where constraints often result in more interesting choices creatively.
100%.
That when you give somebody too much freedom and say you can do anything you want, what you end up with is often wildly overambitious, or doesn't resolve in a satisfying way, or just, when you limit people's choices, it forces them to be creative and come up with just much more interesting things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And having done a pretty large number of 24-hour and 48-hour like film race over the course of a weekend, get no sleep, kind of just make a movie and improvise the whole way through it, it definitely does feel like the constraints inspire you. Like there's sort of, not that everyone has ADHD, or not that you have to have ADHD to experience this, but as someone with ADHD, having a constraint that I need to overcome is in and of itself inspiring. It makes it feel urgent. Like it makes it feel like there's a challenge, as opposed to, the world is your oyster. You can say anything and have it be. And then I sort of feel a little bit lost in the mix. But switching gears a little bit. So how do you use game mechanics to, like, if you know the tropes of your genre, let's say, we're doing this like science fantasy game, and we want the feeling of the players kind of having to overextend themselves and hit a low point before finally reaching, for the stars and overcoming the challenge at the last moment in a dramatic fashion. And like, how do you use game mechanics to replicate that feeling without people feeling like they're being pushed down that path, more that it's like an actual natural progression?
Basically, the idea of it is looking at the way, D&D usually works. You have a pool of health, and you want to keep it as high as possible, that as you are taking damage and going down, you are moving closer and closer to losing. However, that's not generally the way that like action movies work. When you think of your favorite heroes in their scenes, like the fight always starts off with the villain having the upper hand, and they get beaten down, and it looks like they're going to lose, but then they stand up and they dig deep and they rally, and that's how they win. And we kind of wanted to find some equivalent to that, so we developed a system where you are constantly basically spending your health and losing your health and getting zeroed out, but then bouncing back. If you're being tactical about it, you can keep standing back up and fighting back. And eventually, like, while you're never that far from losing, you've always got options to come back and win.
It's an unusual flow, and I'm finding that it's people coming from D&D are not used to it. They're not used to, like, the idea that you're sort of intentionally lowering what they see as their hit point pool, which it's really not. It functions more like you would see like a shield, something that kind of goes down because it's meant to recharge. And we wanted a system that encouraged people to go Nova every fight, basically. Like, don't worry about trying to conserve your resources. We try not to use resource scarcity as a balancing mechanic. We want people to use their features and just include enough tactical tension that you still want to be a little bit careful about how and when. We had a player say, like, in testing, his special features were a little more expensive, and so you're spending that hit point style resource, stamina style resource, really. And his experience was, oh, I feel, I think you need to add more moxie for people. It's not enough because and he hit 0. I don't think he even did hit 0. Like, I think he got close.
I think maybe he did, but yeah, I was running the enemies and I had to throw everything I had against him.
He clearly felt freaked out by that. He was like, oh, I was at 0.
And 0 is bad. It is so hardwired into people that it is an interesting experience to see the adjustment to, oh, actually, the back and forth is as intended.
And as intended, exactly. And that's why I think it was interesting for me, because initially my reaction was, oh, like, he's not quite getting it. But then I realized, well, no, that is what you want. As somebody who's still learning the game, he hasn't seen it work in full yet. And eventually he'll start to realize, but you want the initial hesitation of, this feels dangerous. Because it should feel dangerous. It should feel like you're overextending yourself to recover. And, we wanted that feeling of, I fell so far to then get back up again. So just sort of touching on some other games that have mechanics that are directly meant to inspire the storytelling and the narrative. Blades in the Dark type games that have progress clocks that are tracking all of these different progressions at the same time, that kind of add a sense of tension over, like, okay, when we do something, you see time ticking away and getting closer and closer towards whatever the conclusion is. I haven't gotten a chance to play the game, but I've certainly read a lot about it, and I would love to try it, because that to me is just such a, like, clearly it made a huge impression on just the design community in general. And I like the idea that you are instilling a sense of tension within the players on an above the table level that should also be the case for their characters. That you're sort of giving them a mirrored experience. That to me is exactly what that is. It is the game mechanics replicating or helping to tell the narrative by giving those players that feeling. And I think that's super cool.
Sure. And similarly, I've dabbled a bit in Daggerheart and their interesting fear and hope system of, you may succeed, but you're also feeding the GM some fear that they can spend to do nasty things. Or you're failing, but there's still hope because you've accumulated some resources that you can use to turn things around later.
Yeah, and I think that's a fantastic way to get the themes of your game right up front. That Daggerheart is built around the idea that you are heroes struggling with these two opposed concepts, that you are being constantly challenged by fear, by your own fears or the fears of the people around you that won't want to take action the way that you can, or conversely, that you can use your hope to overcome it, that you can say, I can see into a brighter future if you just follow me. That, like, it instills a sense of who your character is within that world based on the game mechanics themselves and how they're named specifically, because those could have been named a lot of things. I mean, there are other games, any 2D20 style game that deals with, like, tension, and also I think that one of the old I always forget because there's a few of them, but one of the old Star Wars RPGs has, light side and dark side points that you kind of spend back and forth. That kind of meta-currency, I think, sometimes takes players out of the game if it doesn't feel rooted in the actual fiction of what's happening. Like, what's happening, and does this feel like it's part of what's happening? Versus,
or is it just another form of bookkeeping?
Yeah, is it just some kind of, like, when people talk about meta-currencies in a critical way, I think a lot of times one of the first things that comes to mind is, like, but what is this? Like, it doesn't, what is this modeling? What is this? Like, if my character can't talk about this in character to people in the setting, then what is it? What am I handling right now? And I like that when you see it well utilized, it is something that is still incredibly thematic to that game and the types of stories that they're trying to tell.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think an interesting thing to end on as far as, like, game design, because we're, we're both game design enthusiasts. We've been doing this for this long for a reason. It's because we love doing it, but we also love like engaging with other people's videos that they post and learning about how they design games and seeing like, okay, how would, what is tabletop solve this one problem? Or I think it's just interesting to have those conversations about what the solutions might be. That to me is the fun part about it. Like we have a relatively new but sort of like blooming Discord community that's been like really excited to play test for us.
Yeah.
So it's really incredible to see. And we could of course go on and on and on, but I think we've probably encapsulated as much of this subject as we can for today. I love this stuff. I can't wait to get more involved in the greater tabletop design community. I've been a ghost on all of every YouTube channel you can imagine that talks about all of these same subjects. I've been, ghosting and watching and just like soaking up the knowledge. And to the extent that we can try and give back and like give people other opinions to bounce off of or disagree with or add other perspectives to, we just love participating in this space. Obviously, if you have any ideas of your own, throw them in the comments. If you know of games that have done the things that we've talked about or have feedback for what our ideas are, any amount of discussion on that stuff is just like what we live for. There's a reason, because we do this in our free time. Like, game design is not a job, it's a hobby, but it's just so much fun.
Yeah, if other people have other perspectives, of other games you've played or even other games you may be designing.
Yeah.
Like we want to hear what you think about all of this topic, and if you think you have better solutions or pitfalls to avoid, things that you didn't like. It's all fascinating.
There's so much complexity to it that any amount of I tried this and it got me this result, and like sharing that experience is just like invaluable. That's frankly why we're building this channel in the first place, is because now that we've been playtesting our game for almost 5 years at this point, which is insane. Right. And all of the different iterations of it, we have like this wealth of knowledge that I look at people, running their channels, and it's like, okay, yeah, there's something to contribute here, even though, I feel like I don't necessarily have the like encyclopedic knowledge of other tabletop games that have been made. I have some, but it's a little daunting. I don't know. At the same time, it's exciting, and I love being in this space. So thank you for, watching, listening, whatever. Play us in the background as you're cooking. We really appreciate it. Give us a like if you think we earned it. Throw us a subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, stay tuned.